The events on the screen are commented by the voiceover of the main character, Roy Pulver. Roy wakes up to the scream of a woman lying next to him on the bed. She is frightened by a man who wants to kill Roy with a machete. Roy dodges the aggressor, pours himself a coffee, spits the hot beverage in the face of the enemy. A helicopter flies up to his house. A man sitting on its board fires a machine gun through the window. Roy hides from the shots behind a wall, and the machete wielder dies instead. Roy throws at the machine gunner a knife he had taken from the man with the machete shortly before. The knife stabs the gunner in the forehead, and he falls out of the helicopter to the ground. The pilot cannot control the helicopter, and it crashes into the house. Roy's worried. The apartment's a rental. The landlord doesn't like me anyway. How am I supposed to pay back the deposit? Roy is thrown out into the street by the blast wave from the helicopter crashing into the house. He falls into the sand-filled back of a truck driving down the street. Roy says that sometimes he didn't get into the back of the truck and died falling to the pavement. And that hurts like hell. I'm caught in a monstrous time loop. This is the 140th time this has all happened to me. Roy walks up to a convertible stopped at an intersection and throws the man behind the wheel out into the road. And he keeps yelling like he's being raped, carjacking. And then I get attacked by two girls in a minivan. One I call Esmeralda, one I call Pam. I don't know what their real names are. I never had time to talk to them. I gave them all names, Smiley, the Nazi brothers. And that bastard over there, he looks just like me. And then there's the midget, who's a real badass. The midget blows up Roy with a grenade. The ladies in the minivan are chasing Roy, shooting at him with guns. Roy: I'm going to pass the bus, it'll be easier. Shit, it didn't work this time. Roy crashes into the bus, flies into its interior, and dies. Roy wakes up again to the screaming of a blonde woman lying next to him, fighting with a man armed with a machete. Roy manages to avoid a collision with a bus. He drives into an underground parking lot and massacres a couple of ladies in a minivan there. Leaving the parking lot after Pam and Esmeralda are killed in an explosion, Roy says, I don't feel sorry for them. Roy walks into a bar. He approaches the bartender, Chef Jake, asking for a bottle of Baijiu. Dave enters the bar. He sits down next to Roy at the counter. Roy: he's some security specialist in a private office, tells the same story. I remember it by heart. And when I get drunk, I start telling him war stories about how I've died many times myself. Roy says to Dave, have you ever been shot in the face? No, I have. Right here. Imagine a bullet in my mouth and I can taste the steak. And it's only later that I realize the bullet has warmed my tongue. I taste steak from my own tongue. Roy: then it's 12 hours and 47 minutes later, and I get killed. I've never lived longer than a minute, but I'm thoroughly drunk by this time. Esmeralda, Pam, Guan Yin, and the dwarf enter the bar. They pull out their guns and shoot Roy, who is sitting at the bar. Roy goes to a payphone hanging on the wall of the house, dials a number. A man's voice answers. It's Colonel Clive Ventnor. Roy asks to get his ex-wife Gemma Wells on the phone. Ventnor says he can't do that. Unfortunately, she's dead. I hate to give you bad news, but Miss Wells slipped and fell unluckily and broke her neck. Roy: was it yesterday? Yes, it was. Flashback. On the eve of Kirkaday, Roy arrives at the lab where Gemma is working. They're being watched by Ventnor and his head of security, Brett. They hear what Roy and Gemma are talking about. Roy brings his wife a resume and she tells him that they have an opening in security. Roy asks Gemma about their son Joe. Ventnor tells Brett that he's hated people like Roy since childhood. He's a perfectionist who makes up for his lack of ability with chutzpah. Brett enters the lab and informs Gemma that no outsiders are allowed in here. And we have no openings, and Colonel Ventnor is waiting for you. Gemma hugs Roy and says in his ear, I sent you a birthday present. Have you looked at it? Roy: no. Gemma: remember Osiris? Gemma enters Ventnor's office. He's smoking a cigar. Does cigar smoke bother you? No. Sit down. or this conversation is going to feel like an interrogation. During the dialogue, Ventnor insinuates that no outsiders are allowed in his lab, even if that outsider is your son's father. Gemma leaves Ventnor's office. He tells her goodbye. Just don't step out of line. Then Ventnor tells Brett, who was there when he talked to Gemma, to deal with her. Roy is sitting at the bar with a blonde woman, Alice the dentist, next to him. She says she needs to step away to use the restroom. Roy is talking to the bartender, Gabriel. He says he wouldn't mind spending the night with her. Gabriel says Roy is in love with another woman. I can see it in your eyes. The phone on the counter rings. It's Gemma. Gabriel hands the phone to Roy. Gemma tells Roy again that he needs to see her gift. The connection is cut off. Alice returns from the bathroom. Roy takes Alice to his house. They have sex, fall asleep. In the morning, Roy is awakened by Alice's squealing, frightened by a man with a machete. Roy goes to the arcade before going into the bar. He meets Joe there. Roy wants to tell the boy about the death of his mother, that he now has only one person close to him, his father. Roy looks at his watch. 12 hours and 50 minutes. I've already lived 3 extra minutes. The assassins show up and shoot Roy. Roy finds a gift from Gemma in the apartment. It's a book that outlines the myth of Isis and Osiris. The evil Seth killed Osiris, chopped his body into 14 pieces and scattered it across Egypt. Roy tries to figure out how the murderers calculate his location. It comes to him. It's a bug. Roy walks into a bar and turns to Dave. If you wanted to implant a bug in a man's body, where would you put it? Dave. In a tooth, preferably a root tooth. Also, the mouth in general is a natural antenna. Flashback. Alice gives Roy anesthesia before she starts drilling his tooth. Roy. Can you tell by the look of it if there's a bug in the tooth or not? Dave. Unless you pull the tooth out. Roy orders Chief Jake to give him a large bottle of Bijou and pliers. The bar patrons hear Roy's screaming coming from the restroom. Roy comes out of the restroom and shows Dave the pulled tooth clamped in the pliers. Dave. You're out of your mind. Roy. Don't worry, it'll grow back. What time is it? 12:45. Roy. Only 2 minutes left. He pulls out another tooth and finds a GPS tracker. Dave looks at the bug. It's a lot of dough to track you. The killer shows up, puts a gun to Roy's head. He tells Jay, I'll see you soon. Roy wakes up to the screams of a terrified Alice. He kills the machete wielder, then demands that Alice tell him whose orders she used to put the bug in his tooth. Alice says Brett gave the order. Roy. I'll put a hole in his chest. Roy enters the bar, addresses the chef Jake, a large bottle of Bijou and pliers, stat. Roy gets what he needs and hides in the bathroom. I've died 145 times so far, but now I'm going to make a change. With the help of a bug, Roy tracks down Pam. It turns out she's armed with a gun that belonged to Hitler and cost $750,000. Roy kills Pam, saying with each shot, "This is for the Jews." Roy destroys all the assassins who were after him. He arrives at the lab to clear things up with Ventnor and Brett, but is killed time after time by a sword-wielding Guan Yin. Roy takes sword fencing lessons from Dai Fen and breaks into the lab. He learns that Gemma has been working on the installation of the Staff of Osiris, the activation of which will lead to the end of the world. Gemma has made Roy's DNA part of the installation, so only he can stop the activation. Roy decides to prevent the apocalypse at the cost of his life.